If your heating broke down tonight, you'd be uncomfortable. You would not die. Your ancestors did not have that safety net. For most of them, the first hard winter in a new land was the only test that mattered, and most of them failed it. We tend to imagine early humans as tough enough to just push through the cold. That's not really what saved them. Toughness barely factors into it. What actually got our species through winter after winter in places the human body was never built for was a set of very specific, very fragile pieces of technology, and a decision that had nothing to do with strength at all. Let's go back to where this problem actually started. Modern humans evolved in Africa, in a climate that never asks much of your body. No fur needed, no fat reserves needed, just skin built to shed heat, because heat was the only real threat. Then, somewhere around 60,000 years ago, groups of these same humans started pushing north, out of Africa, into Europe and Asia, into places where winter could drop below freezing for months at a time. This is where it gets interesting, because Homo sapiens were not the first hominins to face this problem. Neanderthals had already been living through European winters for over 200,000 years by the time modern humans showed up. They were shorter, stockier, built with wider noses to warm incoming air, and more compact bodies that held heat better. In a straight biological contest, Neanderthals were built for the cold, and we weren't. So the question isn't really how ancient humans survived winter. It's how a species that was worse equipped for the cold managed to outlast one that was built for it. The first answer is clothing, and the evidence for this is stranger than you'd expect. In 2016, researchers working in Denisova Cave in Siberia recovered a sewing needle made from bone with a drilled eye for thread, dated to roughly 50,000 years old. That's not a rough animal hide draped over a shoulder. That's a tailored garment, fitted and sewn, the kind of thing you need to actually trap body heat instead of just blocking wind. At a site called Sungir in Russia, archaeologists found burials from around 34,000 years ago, where the bodies were covered in thousands of ivory beads, arranged in patterns that matched the seams of fitted clothing, hoods, trousers, even boots. The beads themselves weren't decoration. They marked where fabric used to be, fabric that rotted away tens of thousands of years ago, and left only its outline. Compare that to what we found from Neanderthal sites. Almost no needles, almost no evidence of tailored, layered clothing. They likely wrap themselves in hides, which works, but doesn't come close to a sewn, insulated, multi-layer garment for keeping heat in through a Siberian winter. Clothing wasn't the only piece. Shelter mattered just as much, and one site in particular makes this obvious. At Mezhirich, in modern Ukraine, archaeologists uncovered the remains of huts built almost entirely from mammoth bones. Dozens of skulls and tusks stacked and arranged into a dome, then likely covered with hides. Building something like that takes an enormous amount of coordinated effort. You need multiple people working together over multiple days, hauling bones from dead mammoths across open, frozen ground. This wasn't a shelter one strong person threw together. It was a group project, and groups that couldn't organize that kind of cooperation didn't get the shelter. Then there's the calorie problem, which is honestly the part most people never think about. Staying warm burns an enormous number of calories. Your body is essentially running a furnace non-stop, and that furnace needs fuel. In winter, when plants are dead and rivers are frozen, that fuel came almost entirely from fat, specifically animal fat, which is why so much of the archaeological record from cold climates is built around big game hunting. A single mammoth carried enough fat and calories to carry a group through weeks of brutal cold. Miss that kill, and the math simply doesn't work out. So here's where the story gets darker. Because none of this technology, the needles, the mammoth-bone huts, the coordinated big game hunts, guaranteed anything. Genetic studies of ancient human populations have found evidence of what's called a population bottleneck, a period where the number of breeding humans on the planet appears to have dropped sharply. Some researchers have connected this to climate stress tied to glacial periods. Winters weren't a seasonal inconvenience. Entire bands of people, entire lineages, simply didn't make it through, and we only know they existed at all because of scattered bones and tools left behind in the layers of dirt where they died. And Neanderthals, the ones who were biologically built for this exact climate, still went extinct around 40,000 years ago, right around the time modern humans were spreading through the same territory. For a long time, the assumption was some kind of direct conflict. humans wiping out Neanderthals through violence or competition for the same resources. The more recent picture, based on genetic and archaeological evidence, looks different and honestly stranger. We didn't just outcompete them, we absorbed them. Genetic studies have confirmed that modern humans and Neanderthals interbred multiple times as our populations overlapped in Europe and Asia. And this wasn't a minor genetic footnote. Some of the genes that came from that interbreeding are directly tied to cold survival. A gene called EPAS1, inherited from Denisovans, close relatives of Neanderthals, helps modern populations at high altitudes process oxygen more efficiently in thin, cold air, and it's still present today in Tibetan populations. Other Neanderthal-derived genes have been linked to fat metabolism and skin adaptations useful in colder climates. In other words, part of what let modern humans survive winters they weren't built for wasn't clothing or shelter at all. It was borrowed biology, quite literally inherited from the same species that eventually disappeared. So, which one actually saved us? The needles, the mammoth huts, the fat-rich hunts, or the genes we picked up along the way? The honest answer is nobody can fully separate them. It wasn't one solution. It was every solution stacked on top of every other one, and even then, it barely worked. Most groups that faced a truly hard winter simply didn't make it to spring. You are right now sitting somewhere warm, wearing clothes you didn't have to sew yourself from an animal you didn't have to kill, eating food that didn't require your entire group's coordinated survival to obtain. And your body still carries the leftover proof of how close this all came to not working. That shiver you get when you're cold, the goosebumps raising the hair you barely have left, that's the exact same system your ancestors were relying on, uselessly trying to trap warmth under fur that mostly isn't there anymore. Every winter you've ever complained about was, for most of human history, a test with a real chance of failure. You're not descended from the toughest humans who ever lived. You're descended from the ones who happen to have a needle, a mammoth-bone hut, or a gene borrowed from a species that didn't make it.